metal walls were closing in, and the boy next to him had stopped shivering. That's when Esteban Ruiz knew. In that frozen darkness, surrounded by hanging slabs of beef that swayed with every turn of the truck, he understood that not all of them would make it out alive. The American dream they'd paid $12,000 was turning into a nightmare, sealed inside a refrigerated tomb rolling through the Arizona desert. But the story begins earlier, on that sweltering August morning in Nogales, when he still believed that money could buy safe passage to a better life. The heat in Nogales hit different when desperation hung in the air. It wasn't just the sun beating down on the dusty streets, or the way the air shimmered above the cracked pavement. For him, it was a weight of knowing that every minute spent on the Mexican side was another minute his family back home went without the money he'd promised to send. Another minute his daughter grew up without her father. Another minute his dreams slipped further away. He had been in that border town for 3 days, sleeping in a cramped room above an auto repair shop, when word came through. The coyote everyone called El Gordo had a special arrangement. Not the usual desert crossing that killed so many. Not cramming into car trunks or sewage tunnels. This was supposed to be different. Professional. Safe. The meeting happened in the back of a restaurant that served watery pozo and kept its real business behind a steel door. El Gordo lived up to his nickname. A mountain of man who wheezed when he talked, gold teeth glinting in the dim light. He laid out the plan like he was selling vacation packages. A refrigerated truck would cross at the commercial checkpoint. Papers were arranged, bribes paid, officials looking the other way. They'd be hidden in a special compartment behind the legitimate cargo. 3 hours max, El Gordo promised. The cold would be uncomfortable, but not dangerous. He'd personally ensure the temperature stayed manageable. $12,000. Cash up front. No negotiations. He counted out bills that represented 2 years of savings, loans from relatives, and the sale of everything his family owned. His hands trembled as he handed over their future. But El Gordo's confidence was infectious. The big man assured him he'd done this hundreds of times. His cousin drove the truck. His brother worked customs. It was all family business. That should have been his first warning. The night of the crossing, they moved him to a warehouse on the outskirts of town. That's where he met the others. There was Maria, a woman in her 40s from Oaxaca, whose husband had been murdered by the cartel. She clutched a plastic bag containing her life savings and a photo of her teenage daughter already living in Phoenix. Next to her sat the Ramirez brothers, Jorge and Miguel, barely out of their teens, heading to Chicago where their uncle had promised them construction jobs. And then there was the boy. He couldn't have been more than 16, though he claimed to be 18 when El Gordo's men asked. Traveling alone, he said his name was Carlos and that he was from Guatemala. His eyes had that hollow look of someone who'd already seen too much. When he smiled, which wasn't often, missing teeth showed, not from age, but from whatever violence had driven him this far north. El Gordo's men gave him the rules while they waited. No talking once inside. No banging on the walls. No trying to open the doors. They'd be sealed from outside anyway. If anyone needed to relieve themselves, there were buckets in the corner. The crossing would take 3 hours, maybe 4 at most. They'd pump in fresh air every hour. The cold would be unpleasant but survivable if they kept moving, kept their blood flowing. The men handed out thin blankets that smelled like diesel and death. The truck arrived after midnight, backing into the warehouse with a mechanical groan. It was bigger than he had imagined, one of those 18-wheelers that haul freight across continents. The back door swung open to reveal hanging sides of beef, marbled and frozen, swaying slightly on their hooks. Behind the meat, barely visible, was a false wall with a narrow opening at the bottom, their hiding spot. The Ramirez brothers went in first, helping Maria through. He followed, then Carlos. The moment they were all inside, the opening was sealed with a metal plate. The sound of drilling told them it was being secured from the outside. Then came the sound of meat being rehung to hide the false wall. The door slammed shut. An engine roared to life. They were moving. At first, it wasn't so bad. The 5 of them huddled together for warmth, the thin blankets wrapped around their shoulders. Maria led them in prayer, her voice steady despite the circumstances. The brothers made jokes about how they'd laugh about this once they were earning American dollars. Carlos stayed quiet, pressed into the corner, arms wrapped around his knees. He tried to track their progress by the truck's movements. The stop and start city traffic gave way to the steady hum of highway driving. Occasionally they'd slow down. Checkpoints, he assumed, but they never stopped for long. El Gordo's bribes were doing their job. The cold crept in gradually. First, it was just uncomfortable, like stepping into an over-air-conditioned store on a hot day. They stomped their feet, rubbed their hands together, kept the blood moving like they'd been told. Maria shared stories about her daughter to pass the time. The brothers talked about Chicago, about deep dish pizza, and Lake Michigan and all the money they'd make. But after the first hour, the cold became something else entirely. It seeped through the thin blankets, through their clothes, through skin and muscle until it settled in their bones. Their breath came out in visible puffs. The metal walls were so cold they burned to touch. They pressed together tighter, a pile of human bodies trying to share what little warmth they had. That's when Jorge noticed the vent wasn't working. Reaching up to feel for airflow, he found nothing. The small opening that was supposed to provide fresh air every hour was sealed or broken or forgotten. Their only air was what was trapped in that metal box with them. 2 hours in, the shivering became uncontrollable. Maria's prayers turned to whimpers. Miguel banged on the walls until his brother stopped him, reminding him of the rules. They'd been explicitly told that any noise could alert Border Patrol. One sound, one suspicious movement, and they'd all be caught. Carlos hadn't spoken since they'd entered the truck. He sat in the corner, knees to his chest, the blanket pulled over his head. When someone touched his shoulder to check on him, the boy was trembling violently. Carlos was smaller than the rest of them, less body mass to generate heat, less fat to insulate against the cold. He'd probably been malnourished long before starting this journey. As the temperature dropped, he was the first to really suffer. Without thinking, he gave the boy his blanket. What else could anyone do? Seeing a kid suffer like that, any human would help. Maria did the same, wrapping her arms around Carlos, trying to share her body heat. But it wasn't enough. Nothing they did was enough. 3 hours passed, then 4, then 5. The truck kept rolling through the night, carrying its cargo of frozen meat and desperate dreams across the desert. They'd long since passed the promised drop-off time. Something had gone wrong. Maybe extra checkpoints. Maybe El Gordo had lied. Maybe the driver had simply forgotten about the human cargo hidden behind the beef. The cold had become their entire world. It was no longer something they felt, but something they were. Their movements grew sluggish. Speech became difficult. The Ramirez brothers had stopped joking, stopped talking entirely. They sat against the wall, eyes closed, conserving energy. Maria never stopped holding Carlos. She rocked him gently, humming lullabies from her childhood, even as her own lips turned blue. The boy had stopped shivering. That's what happens when hypothermia really sets in. The shivering stops. The body gives up its fight to generate heat. He tried to stay awake, to keep track of time, to figure out where they might be, but the cold made thinking difficult. Thoughts moved like molasses. He found himself drifting, dreaming of warm places. The kitchen of his childhood home, his daughter's laughter, the feeling of sun on his face. 6 hours. 7. 8. The air grew thick with their breathing. 5 people in a sealed metal box, using up oxygen, producing carbon dioxide. Combined with the cold, it made staying conscious a battle. They took turns sleeping, afraid that if they all passed out at once, they might never wake up. Carlos was the first to stop responding entirely. Maria shook him, called his name, pressed her ear to his chest. In the darkness, no one could see her face, but they could hear the panic in her voice. The brothers, and he tried to help, rubbing the boy's arms and legs, trying to generate warmth through friction. But his skin was like ice, his breathing shallow and irregular. They were trapped in a nightmare of their own making. They'd paid for safe passage and gotten a death trap. They'd trusted El Gordo's promises and found themselves in a frozen tomb. The American dream had become a sick joke, and they were the punchline. No one knew exactly when Carlos died. Time had lost all meaning in that darkness. Maybe it was during hour 9, when the truck finally stopped for more than a few minutes. Maybe it was hour 10, when they heard voices outside, but couldn't make out the words. Maybe it was hour 11, when Maria finally stopped trying to warm his body and just held him, crying silently. All anyone knew was that when the doors finally opened, when sunlight and warm air flooded in like a miracle, when El Gordo's men pried open a false wall and told him to hurry out, Carlos didn't move. They dragged him out one by one, their limbs barely functional from cold and cramped conditions. They emerged like newborns, blinking in the harsh Arizona sun, unable to stand without support. They were at another warehouse, this one on the American side of the border. They'd made it. For them, anyway. El Gordo's men tried to rush them away from the truck, to hustle them into waiting vans that would take them to their final destinations. But Maria wouldn't leave Carlos. She knelt by his still form, smoothing his hair, closing his eyes, whispering apologies in Spanish and indigenous languages the others didn't understand. El Gordo's men grew impatient. This was a business to them, and a dead body was bad for business. They'd dispose of him properly. They promised. They'd make sure he got a decent burial. All lies, probably. Another nameless victim of the border. Another statistic in the war between desperation and geography. They pulled Maria away eventually, still crying, still reaching for the boy she'd tried to save. The Ramirez brothers stumbled toward the van in silence, their American dream tainted by what they'd witnessed. And him? He stood there in that warehouse, feeling the warmth return to his body, knowing he should feel grateful to be alive. But all he felt was guilt. Guilt for surviving when Carlos didn't. Guilt for the blanket he'd given that wasn't enough. Guilt for the $12,000 that should have bought safety but bought death instead. Guilt for being another link in the chain of exploitation that sends desperate people to their graves. They drove them to a safe house in Phoenix, where they were given food, water, and phones to call their families. He told his wife he'd made it safely. He didn't tell her about Carlos. He didn't tell her about the 10 hours in freezing darkness or the boy who'd never see 18. Some truths are too heavy to share across phone lines. Maria left the next morning for her daughter's house. She took Carlos's backpack with her, the few possessions he'd carried on his journey north. She said she'd try to find his family, let them know what happened. The Ramirez brothers caught a bus to Chicago that afternoon. They exchanged numbers but never called. What would they say? How do you maintain a friendship built on shared trauma? He found work eventually. Construction, like most undocumented workers. He sends money home every month. His daughter is doing well in school. His wife says she's proud of him, calls him her hero for making it to America. But heroes don't let children die. Every night, when he closes his eyes, he's back in that metal box. He feels the cold seeping into his bones. He sees Carlos in the corner, getting smaller and quieter until he's nothing at all. He hears Maria's lullabies echoing off frozen walls. He smells diesel and fear and death. The American dream. That's what they call it. But dreams are supposed to end when you wake up. This one follows him into the daylight, a constant reminder of the price paid for hope. $12,000. That's what it costs to learn that some borders can't be crossed with money. Some walls can't be climbed or tunneled under or hidden from. The real border isn't made of metal or concrete. It's made of the bodies of those who didn't make it, a monument to desperation that grows higher every year. He's one of the lucky ones. He survived. He works. He sends money home. He lives in the shadows of a country that needs his labor but not his humanity. And every day, he carries Carlos with him, a boy whose name might not even have been Carlos, whose story ended in a refrigerated truck on a highway somewhere between hope and despair. They say America is the land of opportunity. And maybe it is, but opportunity, he's learned, is just another word for gamble. And in this casino, the house always wins. Some nights, when the Phoenix heat becomes unbearable, he finds himself thinking about that cold, how it hurt at first, then numbed everything until pain became something abstract, something happening to someone else. Sometimes he wonders if that's what America does to people like him, numbs them slowly until they can't feel anything anymore, until they become ghosts of themselves, haunting job sites and restaurant kitchens, invisible until someone needs something built or cleaned or cooked. But then he remembers Maria's arms around Carlos, trying to give warmth she didn't have. He remembers the Ramirez brothers sharing their water, even when they didn't know how long they'd be trapped. He remembers his own hands passing his blanket to a stranger who needed it more. In that frozen darkness, they were more human than the world had ever allowed them to be. That's what he chooses to carry with him. Not just the guilt and the grief, but the proof that even in the worst circumstances, people will try to save each other. Even when the system is designed to kill them, they choose kindness. Even when they're dying themselves, they hold the dying. Carlos died crossing a border, but he didn't die alone. In his last hours, he was held by a woman who sang to him like a mother. He was surrounded by people who gave what little they had to try to save him. He mattered to strangers who had nothing to gain from caring. That has to count for something. In a world that treats people like cargo, that has to mean something. He still works construction. He still sends money home. He still lives in the shadows. But he also volunteers now, leaving water in the desert for those who cross on foot. He teaches English at the community center. He tells his story to anyone who will listen, not the sanitized version, but the truth about Carlos and the cold and the cost of dreams. Because someone needs to remember. Someone needs to say their names. Someone needs to admit that the American dream is built on nightmares, that every success story is a Carlos who didn't make it, that every family reunion requires other families to be destroyed. His name is Esteban Ruiz. He paid $12,000 to hide in a refrigerated truck. 4 of them climbed in. 4 of them climbed out. But only 3 of them survived, because survival is more than just breathing. It's being able to live with what you've seen, what you've done, what you failed to do. Some nights, he still feels that cold. It lives in his bones now, a permanent reminder of the price of passage. But he's learned to carry it, just like he carries Carlos, just like he carries all of them, the ones who made it and the ones who didn't, the ones still coming and the ones who will never leave. This is their story. This is the story of a border that runs to the heart of humanity itself, dividing people into those who deserve safety and those who must gamble their lives for it. The truck is still out there somewhere, carrying its cargo across the desert. El Gordo is still making promises. Children are still dying in the dark. And he's still here, caught between 2 worlds, alive but not living, free but not free, carrying the cold and the guilt and the memory of a boy who just wanted a chance. His name was Carlos. He was 16 years old. He died in a refrigerated truck on the border between Mexico and the United States of America, held by strangers who tried to save him. Remember him. Remember all of them. Remember that every statistic has a name, every policy has a consequence, every wall has a shadow where people die trying to find the light. This is what $12,000 buys. This is what the American dream costs. This is the price of being human, in a world that would rather you be cargo